Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 82. I've got Paul Gottfried, who is the editor of Chronicles magazine. He's long been a conservative journalist, writer, and activist. And he's going to talk about the history of American conservatism and how it has gotten to the point that it's at right now. How are you doing?
I am doing fine. I question whether I'm an activist. I suppose I'm more of a scholar.
Scholar,
history and political theory.
Yeah,
but you are right that I am politically and culturally on the right.
So when did you all get started with this? Just tell me when you get started, and and we'll go from there.
When did I get started with what? With my books?
With your scholarship and your writing and your.
Well, I don't know. I've been publishing books since, I suppose, the 1970s, and I think my conservative views are at least implicit in stuff that I wrote. Although some of my early work is, I suppose, like rather academic, but I was always interested in critics of democracy. The European counter-revolutionary thinkers of the 19th century interested me. It's not because I thought that they were immediately applicable or directly applicable to our own situation, but I thought they were very smart, and they said things that were generally true about the course of democratic revolution and where it would lead. So I was attracted to them in an age, I should point out, that was far more conservative than the one we're living in right now, right? Even back in the 1960s, 1970s, I could not have predicted that the United States and most of the Western world would move in this culturally radical direction in which it has gone, particularly in the last 10 to 20 years. But I was always sort of interested in conservative thought, and at least initially in European conservative thought. My preoccupation or involvement with American thought came much later.
Who would have been some of those figures, the European counter-revolutionaries?
I was interested in Burke, Mestre, the Donoso Cortés in Spain, the Julius Stahl in Germany, the usual assortment of historical pessimists and reactionaries. I think it was Isaiah Berlin who once described Mestre as the father, the progenitor of fascism, which he was not. But having written a book on fascism, I can assure you he was not. But I was always interested in these thinkers. As I tell people, it sort of went back to when I was in college, and we had to read several different documents in a freshman class, one of which was the Second Treatise on Government by John Locke, which I don't think people read in college anymore. I mean, they're too busy reading about transgendered and other relevant things. And the other thing was Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France, and I found Burke much more convincing as a social thinker, as somebody who understood human nature, than Locke, with his imaginary state of nature and these sort of invented natural rights, which weren't entirely invented. I mean, it was an attempt to sort of give an anthropological grounding to what by then I suppose were English historical rights. But I was much more impressed by Burke. And even if I was not in my own life as conservative as the people that I read, I was impressed by the conservatives. I tell people in 1964, I was a Rockefeller Republican, but I loved reading European counter-revolutionaries. So in my thinking, I suppose I was more conservative than in my political actions.
Oh, 64. So you would have been opposed to Goldwater then. What'd you think?
I thought he was terrible. Yeah. I thought he was going to blow up the country. Yeah, there always seems to be an assumption on the part of people who interview me that I was a big Goldwater supporter. I was not.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, I reluctantly voted for him, but I was quite convinced that he was, would be irresponsible with nuclear weapons. Um, and I also hated Johnson, and I never liked the Democrats very much. So I did vote for him reluctantly. I've been much happier if I've been able to vote for Rockefeller or Bill Scranton of Pennsylvania, right? A more moderate figure.
Was that your first presidential election?
Yes, it was. In 1960, I was too young to vote, but if I had been able to vote, I would have voted for Nixon against Kennedy.
Wow. Yeah, so you read some of these. You said Nestor, and I'm familiar with Edmund Burke, of course, but I'm not necessarily familiar with some of these other names you mentioned.
Some of these other conservative thinkers that I
Some
made.
of the other European conservatives. You said, I
Yeah,
think
they
you
were
said Spinoza.
mostly continental conservatives.
Yeah,
And but I thought their understanding of the dynamics of revolutionary was correct. The way revolutions would become more and more radical, and how difficult it would be to turn them back. Even though there was this notion of the Thermidorian principle that the French Revolution only went so far, and then there was a reaction against it in the French Revolutionary month of Thermidor or Thermidor. Um, I think revolutions have a dynamism of their own. And looking at the radicalization of Western society since the 1960s, it seems to me that the counter-revolutionaries were correct. Things do not swing back. That's a mistaken notion.
I think I heard you once say that one of your professors back in the '60s thought, "Oh, this will just pass." That the older professors in the '60s thought that all this stuff in the '60s would just pass, and it didn't just pass.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think of who would have said something like that. Um, I think I did meet professors who believe that this was later that but typically what I heard was that I was exaggerating how radical things could become, and as I think history proved me right, and if anything I minimized or underestimated how radical things could become.
Yeah, definitely. So you read Burke. Wouldn't Benjamin Disraeli have also been considered a conservative back then too? Did you read any of
Yeah,
Disraeli?
he's sort of different. I mean, he's sort of a 19th century sort of Tory Democrat,
Yeah,
who uh, sort of creates a modern conservative party for England, one that is able to draw in the support. He was hoping of the working class. Um, Disraeli is sort of interesting that way because he's almost a forerunner of modern populism. And I think to some extent this is true of Bismarck in Germany. I mean, or Louis Napoleon in France, who sort of creates this model in which you have an essentially conservative government turning to the people, turning to the great unwashed for support, and allying with them against, one might say, sort of the progressive middle class. And this, I think, goes back to the 1840s and to the French example under Louis
yeah,
Napoleon, and then it's followed by Disraeli and Bismarck in uh, their countries, their separate that in England and in Germany.
yeah. And what about some of the revolutionary activity that happened in 1848 in Europe?
Well, those don't generally go anywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sort of failed revolutions,
Hmm.
and it's sort of seen as tragic in some countries. I think what happens though in Germany and Austria and other places, and in France, is that you have generally conservative governments which are able to absorb some of the revolutionary energy by making concessions to the people, by expanding the franchise, by passing, you know, safety regulations in factories, doing things of that kind. And at least, there was some kind of appeal being made to the working class. Something, by the way, which greatly concerned socialists, early socialists like Marx. because the fear was that the ruling class is going to buy off the revolutionary, the most revolutionary class, which they were thinking would be
Yeah.
the working class.
And didn't a lot, I know, like, for example, Karl Schurz from Germany, didn't a lot of those revolutionaries end up coming to America?
Yeah, the 48er, the 48ers in Germany will end up coming
Yeah.
to the United States, where they're not all that radical,
Yeah.
although they tend to be free soilers, they're opposed to slavery, they support the Union side in the Civil War. And then, some of them get, tired of Reconstruction and don't much like the way the Republican Party is going. So they sort of turn in a more conservative direction, I suppose. But you do get revolutionaries, the 48ers, and even earlier in Germany, die Unentwegten, the people, the inflexible revolutionaries who end up coming to the United States. Some teach at Harvard when they
Yeah.
get here.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of them also ended up, a lot of the German ones ended up going to Wisconsin too, but
Yeah.
which kind of became a hotbed for that stuff later.
Yeah, that's right. You got a lot of the free soilers going there. They're anti-slavery. They're
Yeah.
although most of the people sort of come to Wisconsin sort of fit in with the general population quite well, and they don't stand out as radicals or revolutionaries. Unlike, I think, the people who go to Minnesota, which remains a hotbed of radicalism, down to
Yeah.
the present. I think that's probably less
No.
true of the Germans who settle in Wisconsin or northern Illinois.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of, what they call the Wisconsin idea and the whole, and of course, Robert La Follette and people like that.
Yeah, that's right. The follow the Wisconsin idea, which of course they were progressives and they favored, direct election and referenda and stuff like that. Um, it's sort of hard. What do you do with someone like, is Robert La Follette really a leftist? I mean, he sounds very much like an interwar conservative or modern populist, right? And his
Yeah.
position.
I don't know where La Follette would fit today. It's but there was always this idea, that actually we should have democracy, but really all the smart college professors from the University of Wisconsin will run things for us, and they'll just do what they can to teach the public to accept this.
Yeah, well, that's the other side of the progressive tradition, but I don't think La Follette represents that. I think La
Yeah.
Follette is a genuine populist Democrat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but then you get the other progressives who want everything to be put into the hands of experts. I mean, I wrote this book on after liberalism, a mass democracy and public administration, or the administrative state, and those are also progressives, but they're much more interested in control from the top, building a scientific administrative state. They're the ones who win in the end. I mean,
Yeah.
they're the ones who are running us right now in the modern administrative state.
Yeah. Did you? I assume you probably knew Russell Kirk at one point.
Yes.
Yeah. Where do you think Kirk stood? I mean, I think Kirk might. I mean,
Yeah, Kirk was sort of like all over the place. He wrote in defense of European monarchy, European conservatives. In American politics, he was very much of a traditional Republican, kind of isolationist, even a populist. He liked Pat Buchanan, and I think he was attracted to populism. It's interesting if you look at two figures who, in some ways, are very similar, but then they very definitely part ways when it comes to populism, direct democracy. It would be Robert Nisbet on the one side and Russell Kirk on the other. I was quite friendly with both. And Nisbet was a passionate anti-populist. He, did not really, trust the people. He did not like religious enthusiasms, although he was very conservative. He never liked the anti-abortion movement because of the religious enthusiasm of the people. And his idea of a good government is one, I suppose, run by traditional aristocracy, in which popular passions can be controlled. Kirk, on the other hand, seemed to be very enthusiastic about turning the people loose against these left-wing rulers. It was a good idea. And I think he was even at one point even sympathetic to George Wallace. But when it came to Europe, he was very conservative. He was very strongly in support of the nationalist side in Spain, and uh, thoroughly disliked the left. But I think he saw the populist as a conservative force in the United States. Certainly by the 1980s, 1990s.
Yeah. So you first, so you vote, you were in college at the time. Where was your first job in the conservative movement, or what did you do after college?
Well, I when I went to Yale as a graduate student, I did belong briefly to the Party of the Right.
Yeah.
However, I didn't feel quite comfortable there because, as I said, I was a Rockefeller Republican, and most of the people there were, uh, extreme Goldwaterites. I also never shared the enthusiastic anti-communism of the post-World War II conservative movement, the Buckleyites. I always viewed it as excessive, and I'm sure Kirk and Nisbet did as well. Um, I understand that the left is hysterically anti-fascist and has always been that way and continues to be that way. And the right, in turn, became passionately, fanatically anti-communist. But I think the problem in the conservative movement is it ate up everything else. Uh, Being anti-communist became the litmus test of being an orthodox conservative. And at the end of the day, Buckley was quite willing to make an alliance with neoconservatives because they were anti-communist for neoconservative reasons. Whereas anybody who questioned his sort of passionate commitment to an intensified Cold War was kicked out of the movement. So I thought the anti-communism was always a vice that one had to tolerate in American conservatism.
It certainly seems that way.
Mhm.
Obviously Buckley was a major figure in all this.
Mhm.
Do you think maybe they just wanted that they embraced this anti-communism because they wanted to rationalize all this military spending?
No, I think they were genuinely committed to anti-communism. I think many of them were devout Catholics, and at that time, the papacy was very much at war with communism, and I think this was reflected in the conservative movement. Then many of the people who set up National Review, probably a majority, had been ex-communist or people who suffered under the communists. So I think that this experience becomes defining, right? I mean, so the fact that they've been burnt by communism, and that they saw this as really as a kind of Manichaean struggle. Uh, I think this comes to define their conservatism. Now, there were lots of other people who were in the conservative movement and did some fine things, but I think their role was always secondary or even tertiary, right? The anti-communism was the big theme.
Yeah, but I find it interesting that while National Review was anti-communist, they were certainly not friendly to one woman who was very much an anti-communist.
Who is
And
this?
and I'm talking about Ayn Rand.
Yeah, they did not like Ayn Rand because she was an atheist. And remember,
Yeah,
a lot of these people who were anti-communist were also devout Catholics or converts to Catholicism,
yeah,
so they would not have appreciated her views. Although she was obviously anti-communist.
yeah, yeah. And having experienced herself, and of course, also, we could also certainly a lot of the Southern Protestants of the time were also anti-communist.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. There was a strong Southern Protestant contingent, in the anti-communism. Um, but they did tolerate other people who were atheists. They sort of stayed on, like Max Eastman, although I think he left on his own.
Yeah,
Right. So they didn't necessarily kick you out for being an atheist. If you were not anti-communist enough, they would kick you out. And I think that I've argued that this was what the John Birch Society did, that they opposed the war in Vietnam, and they would, this sort of put them on Buckley's blacklist. I mean, there were other things they did that were silly and stupid and so forth, but it was the fact that they opposed the Vietnam War, which was a holy crusade at National Review, I think caused their ouster from the movement, or at least their ouster from Buckley's version of the movement.
Well, Buckley seemed to be the unofficial, really the unofficial leader of the whole conservative movement, at least as far as the intellectual class was. I mean, was there anybody else really who had more power than he did?
No. Yeah, and he also, while being, I think, a brilliant polemicist and a man of, undoubted literary talent, he started, I think, what was an evil practice in the conservative movement, which is gatekeeping, which National Review has gone on doing. They removed me, like in the 1980s. I didn't go along with some party line, but they've always done this. I mean, there's a conservative establishment. You're expected to hold certain views. They allow deviation toward the left, but never toward the right. If you move a little too far to the right, then you become suspect, a neo-Nazi or a white nationalist or something like that, even if you are neither. But this practice of excommunicating people for not holding the party line goes back to Buckley. This is something that he did with increasing frequency. And after he became associated with the neocons, he went along with their purges as well.
But if you keep, purging people for going too far to the right, you're inevitably going to end up going to the left.
Yeah, that's what happened. It's happened.
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah,
it's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that even the Justin Raimondo always said that they were Trotskyites. Do you think maybe that was something that maybe they never really stopped being communists? They were just against that type of communism.
Yeah, I think Justin picked that up from me, because my interpretation of the conservative movement, I stressed the Trotskyist origins of some of the neoconservatives. Yeah, I don't think they were necessarily, Trotskyist, or they went through that phase on their way to becoming neoconservatives. But I think there is a Trotskyist element that is very definitely present. I think Justin may have exaggerated their association with Trotsky, but I mean, Trotsky believed in world revolution, right? Yeah. And Russia was just the vehicle by which you have socialist revolution in every country. Well, the neocons they sort of became social democrats, but whatever they were, they wanted the United States to be a vehicle for spreading their ideology throughout the world. And in this sort of, what I say, sort of left-wing globalism, they are very definitely following a certain kind of Trotskyist mindset.
Yeah. Well, more recently, I like what Gonzalo Lira called it. He called it rainbow imperialism.
That's exactly, yeah. That is the more recent version of it, which you get from someone like Jamie Kirchick, who writes, I think, in the Washington Examiner, and he basically wants the United States to impose gay rights on the world, because he loves gay rights. He's gay, so this is part of the democracy package. It's whatever we have here becomes a dogma, a religious dogma that we are to impose on everyone else.
Yeah. So where do you so what do you think? We can safely say that the conservative movement never really conserved anything. What do you think it was due to this orthodoxy that Buckley imposed, or do you think what do you think could have been done? How would you like to, if you could rewrite history, how would you rewrite it?
Well, we would not have this hyperbolic communism to start with. Yeah. The Soviet Union would be regarded as, as a political danger, which they were. And, we conservatives obviously reject Marxist ideology. As we should absolutely reject gay marriage, transgender, anti-white racism, all the stuff we're getting now, right? I mean, although I think wokeness is a much greater danger to Western civilization than communism ever was, I think one of the things that I find infuriating is the way um, the conservative, well, probably cynically, emphasizes anti-Marxism now. We're not talking about 1950s. They're doing this now, and I think part of it is they want to include the woke left as part of their coalition, when they want to direct their energies against socialism or what's really a non-existent Marxist danger. So I think the anti-communism is dangerous because you just can't get rid of it in the end. It becomes anti-Marxism, even when the Marxism is not any kind of danger. Um, if I had, if I were a conservative movement, the position I would have taken would have been in favor of decentralization. This is clearly my position, and disempowering the administrative state, which has just too much power and has destroyed any kind of constitutional government in the United States. Okay,
Yeah.
and I think some of the crusades that we went off on, again, civil rights, women's rights, all of this stuff was overdone, and simply landed up empowering the government at the end, giving it the power to take away liberties from most Americans in the name of fighting discrimination, interfering in private social relations, interfering in everything. Um, so I think the conservative movement should have emphasized those dangers more than it did, although it did address some of them back in the 1960s. Um, and I think those warnings were entirely justified. Um, Another thing it should have very definitely worked against is this messianic notion of the United States. That we were put here by God to convert the entire planet to whatever we believe politically at a particular time.
Yes.
Um, and I agree with people like George Kennan and others who are very critical of this Wilsonian messianic streak in American politics. Um, so I hate to be negative, but there are many things that the conservative movement should have opposed going back to the 1960s, although they probably would have been attacked as unpatriotic for doing that. I think they should have been serious about limited constitutional government,
Yeah.
uh, considering the alternative under which we are living and groaning right now.
Yeah, and I think James Burnham wrote that book, The Managerial Revolution, which is very
Hmm.
much like the administrative state.
Right.
Do you think while the conservative movement was always anti-communist, do you think it was ever really sincerely pro-capitalist?
Yeah, I think they were. um, at least on a theoretical level. I mean, they favored free enterprise, but I think their anti-communism was the overshadowing issue for them. Now, so Buckley once made this thing that until we have defeated communism, we may have to live with a totalitarian government, on these shores or something, in order to defeat communism.
Yes,
And I think that's a very dangerous position to take.
but there was but you never really saw much effort to roll back the New Deal or to roll back any of
No,
that stuff. And
no, no.
I mean, would it have been? I mean, for example, in the 50s or the 60s, would it have been possible to have gotten rid of Social Security at the time?
Probably not. I think there were certain things that were embedded, and I think Eisenhower probably did as much as he could to control the growth of the
Yeah.
state at that time. There certainly should have been opposition in the 1960s to the Great Society program, all of them, the stuff that the Democrats were doing. And another thing, I think there should have been decentralization. That if we have to under the sort of welfare state regime, then the people running it should be responsible to voters, if possible at the state or local, and if even possible at the local level. So it is a highly centralized
Yeah.
administrative state, which I think is also a problem we've been suffering from. Another thing, I think that we have to sort of look at is extending the franchise. And I know I'm always attacked as a sexist, racist, and call me whatever you want. I'm an old man. I really couldn't care at this point. But I mean, you have to have voting qualifications. Allowing 18-year-olds to vote is insane. Um, And you can say, well, let people of all races vote, but there should be qualifications to vote. Not everybody should be allowed to vote. There should be residence requirements, all kinds of other things that are required in order to vote. Um, because by now you can't control the electorate. If you want to do anything, even to verify elections, you're a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, or whatever. I think these problems should have been dealt with back in the 1960s.
Well, yeah, there's certainly been a lot of, as far as, I don't. It's hard to say where you go with voting. I mean, but also, but we also saw a lot of social changes too. I mean, the growth of no-fault divorce.
No, I agree. I mean, all the social changes were disastrous, but extending the franchise the way we did was absolutely, constitutionally destructive. I think I always thought Benjamin Disraeli in the 19th century, had this discussion with Salisbury, who was his disciple, and the question was, should you allow Jews to sit in Parliament or something like this? And although Disraeli was an Anglican of Jewish descent, he was sort of like looking at it realistically. And the question is, whom can we afford to allow to sit in Parliament without creating disruption? And I think it's exactly the way you approach these things, that if you want a constitutional government, if you want constitutional freedom, if you want limited government, if you want freedom of association, all these things that Americans once valued, which I know you value, whom can we allow to vote? It's as simple as that. I don't know, it was Carl Schmitt or somebody once said that, democracy should not be a suicide pact. And that's what we have done. We have a suicide pact now. And I see absolutely no way of saving this country, at least partly because of the sort of unlimited franchise that we now have.
Well, John Adams also said there was never a democracy that didn't commit suicide. I mean,
Right.
What about maybe limiting voting? I would say they're limiting voting to people who either paid income tax or property tax.
At the very least.
Yeah, I mean, because some people may not be making much income, but they might own property and
Right, or a resident. There should be residence requirements.
yeah. I mean,
There should only be election on election day where you go to vote, because everything
oh
else,
yeah,
everything else is a fraud. It's
yeah. I definitely agree
fraud
that
they're committing.
yeah, all elections should be on election day. Definitely, that's
Yeah.
I mean, you have these, and it's often sometimes a bond election or a
And,
city
and
election.
the media will incite riots. We know what they do. They behave like Nazis. The media, we know exactly how they're going to behave. But you have to hold the line on this voting, because it's totally out of hand. I don't see any way that the totalitarian left cannot win national elections at this point, and I think it's very dangerous. They might be able to win honest elections. Given how broadly they've extended the franchise. And in many states, you don't even have voters don't have to identify themselves. Really. In my state, you don't. I can just go and pretend I'm whoever I say I am. And
Well, I can say too, though, that back when my mother worked the polls for many years,
Mhm.
You had small precincts. Everybody knew who everybody was anyway,
Right.
and that was the whole thing. Reason for having small voting precincts was
Mhm.
because everybody knew who everybody was. So, really now that this is something that people don't talk about with feminism, but most poll workers at the time were housewives. And now they're mostly retirees, and that's why you've started having shortages of poll workers.
Yeah, I thought you'd say something else, that housewives are okay, but unmarried women who go to college, and particularly the ones who major in Black studies or women's studies, don't want them voting. In my state of Pennsylvania, they put a brain damaged radical, John Fetterman, in as a senator. And even though he cannot do anything, I can barely speak, or this 39% of the population approve of him. And I assume, they're predominantly unmarried women at this point.
I don't, that's actually something they've shown very interesting is almost always the unmarried women who vote socialist.
Yeah, they're the most radical
It's
voters.
but the married women, yeah, it's
are more conservative. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that really happens there.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's rather interesting what happened. So,
Hmm.
you know, when you were at Yale, was Yale pretty bad then, or what's happened with the Ivy League and the elite colleges? What's happened there?
Well, I think uh, there was sort of a changing of the guard, which at first looked like it was okay, but then became worse and worse. And at Yale at one time, like most of the Ivy League had been the preserve of the old WASP patrician class, right? Uh, who went there and um, made social contacts. Many of them ended up working for the government, but they came from distinguished families going back centuries, and they generally probably excluded other groups. What happened was the other groups sort of came in and
Yeah,
took over. But it was not a situation in which the groups that came over were really interested in continuity. They were in many ways very resentful of having been kept out, and were politically and culturally quite radical. And that's what I think you're seeing in the Ivy League. And even the people who represent what had been the old guard have also either lost their marbles or become totally radicalized. I remember the president at Yale when I was there was Kingman Brewster, whose ancestors came over on the Mayflower. Right, he was descended from Governor Brewster of 17th century Massachusetts. He was a total radical. At one time, a Kingman Brewster would have been an ultra conservative. That was no longer the case, by the mid and late 1960s. So I think even what was left of the old guard turned bad. um, but I think there was much to be said for the older system if it had been, perhaps more generous to newcomers. But as long as that system was in place, there were certain amenities that were followed. For one thing, you could have open discussion. You could have different points of views in debating clubs without
yeah,
being attacked as a racist, a sexist, an anti-Semite, or whatever they're going to call misogynist, or whatever they're going to call you, because the old WASP aristocracy did believe in open discussion. The people who followed them did
yeah,
not, and do not. They go after you for having the wrong point of view. So I think this is one serious problem that you have with the Ivy League. Another thing which is more recent is a lot of they don't need much money because they have lots of money, right? And they're heavily invested, and I think Harvard has billions and billions of dollars, and University of Texas in Austin is one of the richest schools in the country, as you must know. Uh, and they have a lot of oil money. So a lot of these places are quite rich, and the donors that they have become woke donors. So they really don't have to go to ordinary people and depend on them for money.
yeah,
Um, and that's a bad thing because
yeah,
they if they were normal people, they would you know allow all these freedoms and so forth. But since they've been captured by this woke ideology,
yeah,
they're not really open to other points of view, and nor are they financially dependent,
yeah.
on people who do not agree with them.
And in your days back at Yale, there was the boys' dorm, there was the girls' dorm,
Right.
and boys did not go into the girls' dorm, and the girls did not
Right.
go into the boys' dorm.
That's correct. There was
You
there was
know,
gender separation.
yeah, it was.
You could see how naive I was, because I came from a profoundly puritanical home where, like, you never had any sex unless you were married for 10 years or something like that.
Yeah,
And I found out that one of my graduate student, fellow graduate students, was having an affair with some lady with whom he was living. I was actually shocked out of my mind, and one of my professors wanted to take away his fellowship because he thought that this was so scandalous. I mean, this is like almost something out of the Middle Ages now. Right? You can't even imagine this happening.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I don't know how many schools are like that anymore. Maybe from what I've heard, maybe still Brigham Young, but You don't really hear anything like that happening.
Yeah, there are some
Yeah,
Protestant fundamentalist schools that are like that. I imagine
yeah.
that what is the one, Bob Jones or someplace like that,
Bob Jones, yeah, and
or Liberty University, I assume is something that's like that.
Liberty, yeah, and
Yeah,
I don't know what's going on in Hillsdale or Grove City, but we could certainly
Grove City. I don't know about Hill. Maybe Hills. Grove City certainly is. They're old Presbyterian.
yeah. Yeah. So do you why do you think did anybody eventually see that this appeasement of the left wasn't working, or do you,
Well, it wasn't working for whom? I mean, there were people benefiting
it
from it.
wasn't working to it wasn't working to conserve the country as it was,
Well, I think what you find is that energized elites, are able to
yeah,
control the energy field very well, so that the people who were favored these forces of change, sort of starting with the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, I think is
yeah,
basic to all of this, and because every form of liberation that has occurred claims to be following the civil rights movement and does use the government the same way, right? Anti-discrimination agencies, the extensions of the Civil Rights Act or the vote, whatever we're looking at, all of these things, laws against discrimination and so forth. They simply go from one discriminated against group to another one,
yeah,
uh, and the schools certainly indoctrinate people. I mean, there's no way you can escape from this. I was looking at people's reaction to having their kids transgendered in school. Well, there does seem to be a majority that's opposed to it, but not as great as you would think. Then they say, what are fitting subjects in school? Well, it's like almost half the population think that teaching people um, to oppose white racism is a fitting subject to be taught in schools. I would think that people would have enough of this. I mean, turn on your TV and you get this like on every channel now. And advertisement. No, I mean, people want even more of it because they have been so indoctrinated, so imbued with this anti-racism and glorification of BLM and black
yeah,
nationalism and so forth that this is simply part of their lives. I mean, this is a normal part of their lives. Just look at the way the way the BLM Antifa riots were treated in the United States. I would think that half the people would be on the side of the rioters, right? Um, because of
yeah, yeah.
the way the media and so-called educators present these events.
And there's no, and there, and no, and they don't want to admit that any progress has been made in the last 50
No.
years.
Well, there's a very good reason for that because
Yeah,
the left has followed the fascists this way. The fascists always pretended they were in a revolution, and it was only in its first phase, and they were surrounded by enemies, by
yeah,
anti-fascists. Therefore, you had to take extreme measures to get it. I mean, you listen to Mussolini's oratory. This is exact. I wrote a book on fascism. This is exact. They're always the revolution is still, still beginning and is still threatened. Well, that's exactly what you get now from the woke left, right? That we're a minority and we're surrounded by white nationalists and Christian fanatics and Nazis, and we have to take special measures in order to deal with the threat because our very existence is being endangered. I mean, that's exactly the kind of stuff that the left feeds you all the time.
yeah. It really is. And it's I never thought it would get this bad. I mean, I don't think any of us had. And did we think we would still be fighting socialists when the Berlin Wall came down? But we are.
Yeah, but it's not just socialists you're fighting. It's crazy moral degenerates who are also socialists. I mean, it's the cultural moral revolution that comes with their socialism, which is even worse than the socialism. I'm almost nostalgic for old-fashioned socialism. I mean, you could deal with economic arguments. Now, if you question
Yes.
this, you're a racist, a sexist, all this other stuff,
Yeah.
right? A homophobe. You can't even respond to this anymore.
Yeah. Did you ever imagine that, that we'd have a positive opinion of a Kennedy now as opposed to the 60s? I mean,
That's right. I mean, he's considered to be a reactionary.
yeah.
He's a 1960s welfare state Democrat.
Yeah.
He's probably a neo-Nazi by now or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the changes are so rapid, and things become like irreversible. You can't go back.
Yeah.
You only can go forward. Like I'm listening to this fellow, what's his name, Vivek
Yeah. Vivek, yeah.
very effective speaker, but he's saying that people are hungering for idealism, and we've done all these things now, and we have gay men again this, and we have this, and everybody with anti-racist, and you think they'd all be happy, and we have to
Yeah.
find some other ideal. Well, you're not going to find another ideal. You've just whetted their appetite, and they want more. They want more revolution. They're not going to stop at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, they that's the thing. They never really seem like they're satisfied with what they've gotten.
No, they're not.
Yeah, it seems like they're just this destructive element that wants to go along and destroy. And they're very strategic about how they do it. They go from one cause to another,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of see if that cause will work. It's like,
Yeah, I've argued for a long time the model is not the United States, it's Germany, which represents a much more advanced kind of woke left Greens. They're much worse than anything in this country. And they have pretty much closed down any opposition to parties that are indistinguishable from each other, and they're all woke leftist parties, are treated as fascists. And this is exactly what the present Democratic administration wants. They want a totally empty opposition like the Christian Democrats in Germany. They don't do anything. They just, go along with anything transgender. Anything you want will give you green energy, close the atomic plants, which is insane since, that was clean energy. They close it all down.
oh yeah.
And the Germans they're Germans really are very obedient when it comes to the state. I mean, they go along with much more so than Americans.
Yeah, Americans really aren't as servile as some other people, and I think that's a good thing. It's
Yeah, the fact that you have almost half the countries in opposition would be unthinkable in a place like Canada or Germany.
Yeah, and the fact that most of the opposition is also the people that grow the food.
Mm-hmm.
They grow the food. They do all the jobs that really have to be done. Whether they be the farmers or the auto mechanics or the plumbers or the electricians.
You think about what would happen if the so-called red state, whatever you want to call them, the people on our side separated from the people on the other side. And you say, well, gee, the people in the blue states, will call them whatever you want, they really would have a lot more money. They have stockbrokers and this. But the problem is that all the people who are doing the necessary vocations to keep the country going would be on our side, right? I mean, the people growing the food, the mechanics, everything else would be with us.
Yeah, it's really bizarre, and I what's going on. I mean, I remember I had a guy on for a show talking about the Dutch farmer situation. It was just, the whole thing, no farmers, no food. Why are you doing this? I don't think the elites have any contact with the people anymore.
No, one of the problems you have is that the crazies can get enough votes to win elections.
Yeah.
If you could take away their electoral base, you could expose them for the dictators that they want to be. But they are able to manipulate elections. And they also control information sources, which is a very dangerous situation. I'm always writing columns on this. That I turn on my local ABC, NBC, CBS affiliate. I do not even know that Hunter Biden did anything wrong, and his father is a loving father dealing with a son who has a drug problem.
Yes,
and Trump right now is working to turn America into a second, third Reich, or probably even worse. I mean,
Yeah.
the stuff you get on news, they're all lies. I mean, pick up USA Today or something. They're all lies. They don't tell you the truth. They hide reality. And these are information sources that most people are unfortunately exposed to.
Yeah. It's the Trump derangement syndrome was one of the most interesting things I've seen. I've not. I don't know where, but he really made them expose themselves for what they are.
I don't know about that. I have relatives who suffer from that derangement syndrome, and they're quite convinced that Trump is trying to impose the Spanish Inquisition on the United States, that he is the most evil person who ever lived. And they keep turning on National Public Radio for confirmation of their views, but they live entirely in that world. I mean, and of course, I mean, Trump is reckless. He's loutish. He says things that are just utterly ridiculous. But he was really not a bad president as far as recent presidents go, and he is usually none of the things that they describe. And even when he does things that he should not have done, like tell the vice president not to count these votes and so forth. The Democrats have done the same thing repeatedly.
Yeah,
It's
the,
ridiculous.
the double standards on the left are truly remarkable. I mean, these people, were all saying that 2016 was stolen, and
Right.
now it's like you have no right to be an election denier. It's true.
Yeah, but most of these people on the left do not know that there's a double standard, uh, or the people who lean left, because they listen to leftist news sources in which there's no double standard.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah. What do you think happened? Too is what do you think again, going back to the failure of conservatism, where do you think, what other steps do you think, where other places do you think, I mean, how did we end up with Nixon, for example, who was pushing as many bad programs as anybody, and
You say, how do we land up with Nixon as opposed to whom? Who should we?
as opposed to, say, somebody like Goldwater, or
Yeah, but then Goldwater had other problems.
yeah.
I mean, he was. I mean, in retrospect, the things he said about Social Security, I agree with. Some of the things he said about foreign policy were really disturbing for me. um, and I think he had. I think he got drunk on the rhetoric of National Review about pushing back the communists. Um, the in 1952, we could have voted for Robert Taft. It was actually one of my favorite 20th century American political leaders. But then he would have been dead in a few months of cancer. So, and Eisenhower wasn't that bad. I mean, he did what was feasible to control the growth of the welfare state. There was military spending, but he also kept the peace. Um, and in 1968, when Nixon ran for president, he ran as a fairly conservative figure. By the way, I knew Richard Nixon. I met him many times. I was home for dinner. He was a profoundly conservative person, something which you really don't see in his presidency. I would argue. I would agree with you. um, but most of the views that he held were very conservative views. Um, but he just was willing to go along with the left, maybe to buy their support or buy their neutrality, so that he could address foreign policy problems. It did not work very well, of course. But the major problem I see with the conservative, beside this ridiculous anti-communism that was sort of carried to an extreme, the Cold War belligerence. Um, the other thing is this willingness to constantly write off people on the right and build alliances on the left. I've written about this. Um,
Yeah.
I could see why you would not want to associate with a neo-Nazi, but why don't you want to associate with people who raise questions about the civil rights movement, or who tell you that the Voting Rights Act was not a good act and would increase the voting rolls in such a way as to allow the left to win just about any election in the future. You can disagree with this, but why were people ousted from the conservative movement for taking conservative constitutional positions or taking very conservative social positions? And this is basically what happened. And in the 1980s, the neoconservatives just walked in and took over the conservative movement and kicked out anybody who didn't go along with them. So I think some of this is a desire on the part of Buckley and the people around him to win social acceptance from the left. And I think that this has been a problem in the conservative movement going back decades. And one of the things I've argued is if you had a conservative movement that was still holding its positions of the 1960s or 1970s, whatever it is, it would have retarded the leftward movement of the left, because we would have been arguing, we would have been arguing over issues that were more conservative or taking more conservative positions. Gay marriage, you would have resisted this. But of course, the conservative movement did not resist this. They ran to embrace this. What about pulling down Robert E. Lee statues? Great idea. Remove Confederate flag. Just trying to buy support from the left. I mean, this is an absolutely despicable characteristic of these people.
Yeah, it seems to be this. They want to get invited to the cool kids parties.
Exactly. I think that's what lies behind.
It seems as though
they want money from corporations that are on the left.
Well, were the corporations always on the left?
Yeah, they've pretty much always been on the left. But they've said, they haven't maybe always been on the left. Probably they weren't in 1900 or 1890. Yeah. But certainly for most of my life, I've been on the left.
Why do you think that is?
Well, for one thing, they're in alliance with government.
Yeah.
They want a corporate arrangement, and they want government favors. They don't want to land up like, Hobby Lobby, which is run by devout Christians who are always being having their taxes investigated and that kind of stuff. So, therefore you become woke, or you do whatever is necessary to get the government on your side.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did the all the, as you said, that all the real conservatives were gone and the neoconservatives just all walked in the 80s, and that seems to be something that Reagan helped bring about.
Yeah, I agree. There's no question. I mean, he favored neoconservatives. He gave them high positions. He took over their rhetoric. They were the people he dealt with, although those who were, in the older conservative movement thought he was a good guy and was really on their side and that sort of thing. By the way, I was never a Reagan fan, although I did hold some minor posts in his administration.
Yeah, and I mean, really, largely because of Reagan, we ended up with 12 years of the Bushes, and that was a complete disaster. In
Right, that was a disaster. And he didn't even get rid of departments of government he could have gotten rid of, like the Department of Education, the Department of... I think he added the Department of Energy, didn't he? That was one of
Carter added the Department of Energy.
Oh, okay, he could have gotten rid of it, which he didn't do.
Yeah, these were all new positions, and the sad thing about Reagan was Reagan clearly had mandates.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
he had mandates to make those changes.
I mean,
and he won with a very significant majority and was able to carry Congress with him. And really, there has not been a solid red victory in the presidential election since 1988. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think back in 1988. Did Bush win convincingly that year against?
He won pretty convincingly over Dukakis, yes. But you can't say that 2000 or 2004, 2016 were convincing wins. They were both very.
They were marginal, or they won elected the Electoral College but lost the popular vote by millions or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess most of the neoconservatives, is, they used to be on the other side. People like Scoop Jackson and.
Well, they are on the other side again.
They're
Right?
going back to the blue. They're going back to the blue side again. Yeah.
Well, you have the Lincoln Project and Bulwark and all these other
Oh God, yes.
the freedom conservatives who are not going to give us back any freedom. They want
Yeah.
neoconservative rule.
What do you think the Bill Crystals and those creatures want?
They would like to have a Republican Party, with run by people like Romney, or have people like Romney as figureheads, and then they would run everything, and they'd build alliances with the left. They're quite happy doing that. The only thing they probably insist on is an activist, belligerent foreign policy. To spread their values or to help their friends or whatever. On most social issues, I think they've entirely caved into the left.
Yeah. Do you think they're still? Do you think they sincerely have this messianic view, or do you think they're just again bought up by the military complex?
I think it may be a combination of both by now. Yeah. But so many of them, the younger generation of them have just moved to the left, like Max Boot and Bill Kristol, Judy, what's her name? Jennifer Rubin. She was never really on the right. They just pretended she was on. She was some kind of neocon.
Yeah, it seems as though it seems, and what happened? What do you think exactly? Why do you think they supported the first Gulf War, which was really the first big intervention after the Berlin Wall came down?
Well, I think that war looked like it was winnable, an easy war.
Yeah.
Just to drive Saddam Hussein out of some territory that he occupied. But then you discover they wanted more. They wanted to attack Baghdad, go into Iraq, maybe wipe up some other countries. And I think they were very disappointed that the war ended as quickly as it did. Right? I mean, I think they had interest in taking more territory.
In some cases, maybe it's true, but also it got rid of the Vietnam syndrome, as it was called.
Yeah, I know this argument has been made by what's his name, Andrew Bacevich, that this war was seen as compensation for losing for losing the Vietnam War. The same kind of argument is used, by the way, for the Spanish-American War, that it had all these former Confederate commanders leading it, and that this was an attempt to make up for losing the Civil War. And you see many examples of this in history, where a country loses one war and then it jumps onto another war, hoping to make up for the previous lost war. I think there's probably some truth in that, but I think for the neocons it was sort of a way of flexing their muscles, sort of getting back into power. It just the war just ended too soon for them.
True, but it also seemed to say, "Oh, we're not going to roll back, even though the Cold War is over."
Yeah, that's true. The Cold War is over, but you have the same enemies, right? I mean, you have more enemies now than you had during the Cold War.
And they seem to have wanted to work to get it started over.
Because they weren't fighting Soviet aggression. They were fighting anti-democracy, right? So we still have anti-democracy. There are people who do not accept our notion of democracy.
Yes,
like
so
Putin, who does not have gay instruction in public schools, or whatever we now define as part of our democratic mission. And we obviously have to give to other countries.
And like you, I'm not that, democracy is not a sacred cow for me either. I figure it either goes to Hugo Chavez or it goes to Hitler.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, having a society with a constitutional structure, whether it's a monarchy, republic, whatever you call it, is fine. But I would also, restrict suffrage. I'm very big on that. I think the 19th century was correct. They wanted, an educated middle class that paid taxes to be the electorate. Of course, we can't do that anymore because the educated middle class, or the educated class that pays taxes, is now crazy. So
Yeah.
we have to go to the working class as the backbone of the right.
That's the scary thought now too. I don't really, I mean, I remember, as I told you, I'm from West Virginia. West Virginia was solid blue from
Mhm.
1932 to 2000. They had the state legislature from 1932 to 2014.
Right, right.
I mean, that was probably as long a streak as any state has had. And you know, I never thought, you would see Trump win Trump, or I remember it first happened in 2000 with Bush, and I'm like, what? Bush is winning West Virginia? It's like, and then it just got more that way.
Yeah, they changed party loyalty. The last one I think who's going to go is Joe Manchin, right? I mean, they
Yeah,
have
Joe Manchin. I call Joe Manchin the last of the country Democrats,
he's
I
not.
think that
He would be one of the last of the old-fashioned Democrats,
yeah,
like Byrd. The problem
yeah,
is the party has moved so far to the left.
oh yeah,
I mean, someone like Byrd, Richard Byrd, couldn't even fit into that party anymore.
oh yeah, yeah. Well, Byrd made the mistake of being involved with the KKK early in his life, although he disavowed that later and said that it was a mistake. But
But he was always a very conservative Democrat on
yeah,
every social
yeah, he
issue,
was.
and he
Yeah,
was able to be the party head, which is
and I don't know where but I know Manchin used to, at least I don't know if he still does, but he used to get good ratings from groups like the NRA too. There was always a lot, because West Virginia was always a very pro-gun state,
right.
uh, and
And not only did he get high grades from NRA, so did Bernie Sanders in
yeah,
Vermont.
I think Joe Manchin, the only reason he's stuck with the blue team is probably because of family influence. It's like, everybody else in my family's in this party, so I got to be in this party too.
I think there may be more. I think Manchin is sort of a deal maker, as long as he's a Democrat, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they need one more Democratic vote. If he became an ordinary, if he came just to change parties, he would not have the same value.
but it's interesting too, talking about families. You talked about the Robert Taft from the 40s. Look at some of the later Tafts that have been in Ohio. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they're sort of more mainstream Republican and not very competent.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's an example though where the red team just completely went off. I mean, they abandoned anything about free markets or being conservative. If you look at what happened in Ohio,
Well, but it's sort of hard to maintain the qualities of the best members of your family over
yeah,
generations, right? I mean, John Adams is a great man. Even Henry Adams, who's sort of a little nutty, his great grandson is a brilliant writer and historian. I wonder where the Adams family is now. Or Kingman Brewster, descended from Governor Brewster from that,
yes,
the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
yeah,
He was a leftist nutcase,
yeah,
or a Coffin, the congregational minister, descended
yeah,
from a famous Protestant family. I mean, he was a total
yeah.
nut.
What are the Lees of Virginia doing now? I never hear anything about them. One of
One
the
of the
one of the most prominent families in American history.
Which one?
The Lees of Virginia.
Yeah, one of Lee's descendants is some
Yeah,
kind of leftist, which I
yeah,
can't really
yeah,
believe. Uh, by the way, growing up in New England in the 1950s, Robert E. Lee was celebrated as one of our greatest American heroes. And he continued to be a great American hero, even for, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton and others. And then suddenly he went to being the most evil man, who ever lived. But this is exactly what the left can do to you, right? And then the conservative movement jumps in, and we have to remove his statues and so forth. um, I mean, what happened to Lee was unbelievable. Here he was one of my childhood heroes. I was the greatest American. And so I remember Eisenhower had his bust in the Oval Office. He was our greatest American. And Eisenhower was a Republican, from Kansas.
yeah.
If that can happen to
Well,
Lee, it can happen to everyone. Maybe
well,
even Robert.
Eisenhower was a general, and he also respected guys who were good military leaders.
Yes,
I
yes.
mean Eisenhower. I think Eisenhower said nice things about Rommel too.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Yeah,
Rommel's son was the
yeah.
Christian Democratic mayor of Cologne in Germany after the war. It was a greatly admired family. And
Well,
now,
yeah.
of course, Germany is so politically correct. I mean, you have to be, a gay, transgender, green or something to hold that office.
I find it's isn't it so interesting though that to be that a country will completely beat itself up over that horrible tragedy, and yet I don't see the Russians beating themselves up over the over some of the things that happened there. I don't see Turkey apologizing for the Armenian genocide. And the other thing too is though is we don't see any. If you're a Nazi, it's not okay, but it's okay to be a communist and
Right.
be a part of
Right.
some of these past genocides. It's
Yeah, communism is fine.
yeah,
I mean, if you read my book on anti-fascism, I make that
yeah,
point that the woke left isn't communist, but they adore the communists because they see in communists their predecessors. And they love Castro and Che Guevara, and even defend Stalin. They don't care. They love the communists. So being communist is good. Now, some of these other countries don't apologize, but they don't expect them to because they're not Western countries, right?
yeah.
I mean, Japan is not. Japan really is a Western country, but it's Asian and it's not white, so they can get away. In the case of Russia, the people who did all the killing were communists, so that wasn't too bad, right? I mean, we don't want to compare Stalin to a real figure like Salazar or Franco, who were on the right, the Catholic right. But Stalin wasn't all that bad because he was a communist and was doing it for the for the working class and revolution.
Yes,
He was
yeah.
anti-Nazi for a period, although he had been pro-Nazi. He was alliance with Hitler earlier. So I mean the other thing is that Germans seem to be almost uniquely nuts that way. I mean, they do nothing but run around and apologize, not only for the Holocaust, but for badly treating people in Southwest Africa, the Herreras, and they recently was written a book showing that the Germans did not really behave that badly toward the tribes in Southwest, but they're always apologizing for something. They love to apologize, and I think they seem to have masochistic personalities or something like that.
Well, and almost none of those people were alive then.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with them, but
It's
the
just
collective apology you can. But look at the United States. People go on apologizing for slavery. They had nothing to
oh
do with
yes,
slavery. They apologize perpetually. I turn on my TV,
and
slavery. And if you suggest something like, slaves were taught vocations when they were free, they attack you for this. Somebody said this in an educational plan in Florida. William Allen, who's black, he said this that you're not allowed to say this, that they even benefited by being taught vocations. Well, I mean, you have to just say horrible things. Also, no one has ever explained why is slavery in the United States worse than slavery anywhere else, where people are not apologizing for anything. I mean, I don't notice Arabs apologizing for slavery, do you? Or
even though
African
they still do it,
tribes
yeah,
aren't apologizing. They sold the slaves. The ones
yeah,
who came to America lived the longest. They were living in the best material conditions of slaves. Even if one deplores slavery, I don't think slavery in America is, the worst case of slavery. It's probably, the least egregious example that I can find.
or
Go on apologizing all the time. Even if we never had slaves, even if our ancestors weren't even here, we apologize.
yeah. There's definitely a lot of I don't understand. There's a yeah, it's kind of a masochism or a self hatred. It's rather bizarre.
I don't think it's either necessarily. I think in the case of Americans, what you have are leftist elites, which are mostly white,
Yeah,
who are laying the blame on the deplorables, the basket of deplorables, the working class people in West Virginia. They are to blame, you see,
yeah.
because they're not enlightened. But the enlightened people are okay because they recognize their guilt, or and they wouldn't have been guilty anyhow. But the people they're laying the blame on are the people that Hillary Clinton attacked.
Oh yeah, yeah, and you know really and the white anti-racists are a lot worse than anybody from the minority groups.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I would say the same thing, you know, about male feminists are worse than the women.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, like you look at these Black Lives Matter riots and these Antifa, you see white people are running around committing these acts of vandalism. I see more whites than blacks. You just wonder about it. And of course, some of them are also into LGBT as well. I mean, they sort of combine radicalisms. Uh, so you know, one day they're they're harassing some people going into a Catholic church. The next day they're burning down some Korean shopkeeper's business or something like that. There are a lot of these sickies around, I've noticed, and they sort of go from one event to the next.
Yes, they do go from one thing to the next. Well, that's always been how the left operates. I think they just go from one cause to the next. I mean,
Yeah.
you remember when they were, you know, pushing these worthless toilets or pushing the plastic bag bans in cities, and then once they've done their damage, they move on to another cause.
Right, exactly. They've been doing this since the 1960s. You had like prison reform, open the prisons, let everybody out. Then this is the worst thing. The next day they go on to something else, right? I mean, so they just jump from one thing to the next, and without necessarily solving the problem they're claiming to address, right?
Yeah.
They just have to find a new cause all the time.
Yeah, and you know, getting into the '90s and stuff, where else do you think the conservative movement went wrong? I mean, it seems like to me it's always, you know, because there was Clinton who was very much a, you know, somebody they hated, but they didn't seem to oppose him that much. And Clinton actually wasn't really that bad a president compared to what's been after him.
He's probably a lot better than Bush, and particularly Bush the second. It's like one of the worst presidents. The conservative once the some in the conservative movement and certainly the neocons want to go back to something like a Bush II administration. By the way, I noticed the freedom conservatives, whatever they call themselves, one of the Bushies signed this. The the one who was running for president last time. Um,
Yes, was that
so
Jeb?
Jeb, yeah, yeah. You know,
From what I've
the
heard,
neocons would be delighted if he became president.
from what I've heard, he's
They'll
actually
run
not.
back.
He wasn't quite as bad as the other one. He actually did have some like budget cuts,
Did he? I didn't know that.
whereas some of the others have just been horrible.
Mhm.
I don't know if they'll. I think that's one thing maybe I could give Trump credit for. At least he knocked out the Bushes, or at least
He sort of knocked out the Bushes, but
yeah,
then he let in some of their people, like Nikki
yeah,
Haley and uh, the who was his foreign policy
Pence,
advisor?
yeah,
Who was it?
yeah,
I'm trying to remember who was the
Pence, or yeah, yeah.
who.
Was it? There was Pence. There was Oh, he's had different advisors. I can't remember who his foreign policy advisor was. There was
I
Bannon.
know this guy because I knew him at Yale. His
Yeah,
father was a fireman in Baltimore. Um,
yeah.
the, uh, the one who later turned against him, uh, and always wants to start a war in some country to bring democracy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's one. Start a war to bring democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are a lot of these people he put in. He certainly did not favor paleoconservatives. Speaking as a paleoconservative,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and of course his contacts on the right and the people he generally favored were like neoconservatives or establishment conservatives. I mean, as much as Tucker Carlson may have liked his presidency, there was nothing. There was nothing unusual. I mean, it was sort of a regular Republican administration, as far as I could see.
Yeah. And so yeah, what do you think about some of the later pundits, like say Rush Limbaugh or you know or Tucker Carlson or some of the other people. I mean,
I think Tucker Carlson is a lot better than Rush Limbaugh.
yeah.
I think he asks penetrating questions.
Yeah.
He's not just a rhetorician. I think he's highly intelligent, and he does research,
Yeah.
which I don't think Limbaugh didn't. Limbaugh just came up on there every day and made fun of the Democrats. Whereas Tucker Carlson seems to do research with people who do research. And I think he's a lot of the information he's revealed on his program before they kicked him off Fox, which didn't surprise me, was stuff I'd never heard about things the other party was doing, and attempts to neutralize or shut down the opposition and so forth.
Yeah.
I thought it was extremely informative, Tucker Carlson. Although I did not agree with him. Because I thought he went a little too far about the vaccines and his treatment of COVID. I'm not as much of a skeptic as he is, and I think I was also more sympathetic to the Ukrainian side than he was.
Yeah, and since we talked about Tucker, what do you think about O'Keefe and Veritas?
About his what?
James O'Keefe and Project Veritas.
I am very impressed by stuff that O'Keefe does. I know that they're going some kind of fight going on there among people working for Project Veritas, but I think some of the stuff they revealed was extremely useful.
It seems to have imploded since he left, because a lot of people realize James O'Keefe is Project Veritas.
Yeah, they of course the media want to close them down, the mainstream media.
Yeah. So you're not very optimistic. What do you think is the future of conservatism from here? Do you think it's?
Well, I'm a little more optimistic about conservatism than I am about the United States politically.
Yeah,
I think the younger generation on the right seem to be sort of disproportionately right-wing populist, despite the fact that all the money is going to the conservative establishment, like National Review, Fox News, which simply sort of mimics populism, but they're just sort of mainstream Republicans, from what I can see, at least for the most part.
Conservatism, yes.
But the younger conservatives, like people go to the National Conservative Conference, and they're loaded with like thousands of people. They're all on the populist right. Now, you're not going to get back paleoconservatism or the conservatism of the 1960s or this. That's all that's going. But you can still recognize something of the original conservative gestalt in the populist right. I recognize nothing except Buckleyism at its worst in the conservative establishment, and money from large corporations obviously going into it. But I'm really delightfully surprised by how resilient the populists are, and how well represented they are on social media, podcasts, and so forth. And I place tremendous hope in those young people. I'm old, but I place tremendous hope in these young people, to stand up against the left. And I think there are a lot of them out there, and they're running things on a shoestring because they're not getting money from large corporations.
I think there's the possibility. I'm curious to know, what do you think about somebody like Andrew Tate?
Andrew
Tate.
What do the name is familiar to me, but I don't know. I don't remember in what context I should know Andrew Tate.
He's the guy in Romania who's been accused of trafficking women, but he's also run like webcam businesses.
Right. That's the one. And he's very much into physical conditioning and stuff like that. Yeah. I see stuff about him. But he brings a lot of baggage with him, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think though there's a lot of, I don't know if there's a lot of anger among young men in America though, but I think he maybe represents some of that.
Yeah, I don't think he's typical of the right-wing populist. I think he's very much whatever he is.
Well,
he's sort of angry all the time. He seems to be a fanatical and misogynist. He doesn't seem to like it, so takes advantage of women and so forth.
But I also think, when you grew up at a time where people got married, had kids, and largely stayed married, and now we have a large number of people who aren't getting married and
Right,
people getting
right.
divorced, and you have you have something like, what is it, 1/4 of women now are taking some type of psychoactive drugs, and we have men who have no hope of getting married. I mean, as one person, as one pundit, younger man, pointed out, he said the most dangerous faction in any country is, disaffected or disillusioned young men who don't seem like they have any hope.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, and it's becoming more and more difficult to find normal women.
Yeah,
Uh, I mean, let's say you are, you're a well-educated white man. Okay, where are you going? And I want to find some woman who is, sort of culturally compatible with me, and someone to whom I can have some kind of relate. It becomes increasingly hard because more and more women are crazy. Their minds have been entirely distorted, if not by drugs, then by wokeism, feminism, and so forth. And it's very, very hard, to see them as family partners. Want to be
yeah,
around them. So I can definitely understand the concern that these that these people are showing. I'm always saying that if you're looking for a wife, you want to come to my town or maybe some town in West Virginia, because you can find nice women there. And they're women who typically have terminal high school degrees, and their minds have not been destroyed by going to a university.
that's certainly true. Yeah, you don't really have that, or as some say, go or there's, I know one guy who has a program. He calls it Passport Bros, and these guys are literally just going abroad and not.
Yeah, but where do you go abroad? Because all of the Western world has been infected by the same
Uh,
wokeness and feminism.
oh, Mexico, South America, East
That's true.
Asia.
You may be able to go there without having to face the same problems.
Yeah,
Or say, why do people marry Asian women? Well,
yeah,
of course, more and more Asian women are like Western women. I mean, so that might
yeah.
not work very well. They become Westernized very
Well,
quickly.
yeah. Well, this has been a great talk. I think it's a good time to wrap up
Mhm.
right now. You have anything else you want to say before we go? I've really enjoyed having you on here.
No, I don't know. I hope you keep up your good work,
Yeah,
and I'm delighted to speak to a West Virginian as opposed to a New Yorker or somebody living in D.C.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, yeah. I've certainly been all over Pennsylvania. I think I've been to most of the.
Do you know my part of Pennsylvania?
I've been over there a few times. I know the West better.
Well,
I
I'm,
mean,
I'm surrounded by Amish farmers where I
yeah,
live.
yeah, I can believe that. Amish farmers, and
Right.
you're not that far from Gettysburg either. So
I'm not that Gettysburg is in Adams County. It's to the west of me. It's about a 1 hour drive.
yeah, yeah. See, yeah, you're close to Mary. Yeah, I've been around all that, but
Mhm.
sometimes I wish I'd go back. I've certainly driven across Pennsylvania plenty of times. It's a nice drive. Yeah. So
It's a beautiful state.
okay, you got a website or anything, or
Do I have a website?
yeah,
You do have my I have Chronicles,
yeah, you have
and
Chronicles.
but I don't write for my my own magazine's
Yeah,
website. You can see me on American Greatness. I have like millions of pieces, right? Literally
American Greatness. Yeah,
millions of pieces
and
I've written for American Greatness, and I also used to write for American Conservative.
yeah, and you've got some books on books on
I have lots of books. I
Amazon
have
or
probably
place. Yeah,
20 books. I have
maybe
a
I remember
trilogy
that.
on
I've
the
read. Yeah,
managerial state. I have a book on
but,
fascism, one on
yeah,
anti-fascism.
yeah.
Um, I have all kinds of books, several books on the conservative movement.
I should ask too though. What do you think is a good way we might get out of this mess?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I frankly don't know, but I think the only way, the only option for the none-left may be, if they can succeed, some kind of separation or decentralization. You're not going to separate, but that would be very precarious because it would
yeah,
depend on the left letting you do it. which I wouldn't count on.
Yes, and maybe it'll be Bitcoin too.
Yeah, the thing is, if you
Separate.
get enough people, enough different places doing this,
Yeah.
it might succeed in the end.
Okay. Well,
I,
thank
I,
you.
I I think the division in this country is irreversible at this point.
Yeah, I don't think there's, and I don't think there's really anything to gain either for one side.
Well, there's a lot to gain for the left. They
Yeah,
control it.
there's nothing to gain for the right though. That's the whole thing too.
Well, but there is for the conservative
Yeah.
movement because they can play games and make some
Yeah.
money or something like that.
Well, okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow the channel. I'm also on Twitter. Follow me there and go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. I'm Chris Baker. Thank you, Paul Gottfried. We are out.